Can Claude help with infrastructure automation? The answer is yes, it can be a great assistant in helping you learn and solve problems related to infrastructure automation, but it won't replace any specialists anytime soon. So today, this is an experience report about this. Welcome back to Think Design Work Smart. I'm Alex Bolboaca and I'm coming at you from the Mozaic Works studios, and what I have for you today is this experience report about using Claude for learning and for solving certain problems related to infrastructure automation. And I will start with a background, then I will talk about why this is a good problem, then about the approach that I took, about the good stuff, and about the challenges that I faced with Claude. And finally, I will end with conclusions and advice. So stick with us. And if you are here, I have to tell you, based on YouTube laws, like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment, ask questions. We love comments. Okay, let's go. So first of all, some background. Even though I went through university, through the Polytechnics University of Bucharest, where I learned computer science and some parts of software engineering, my learning method has always been trying out things, seeing what works. And this started very early. It started when I was like 14. And I started playing with computers and trying out things. And then I was one of the guys in university who kept installing and reinstalling operating systems to make sure I figure out how they work. So I've always had this approach of trying out things and see what breaks, and then trying out things again. And this, while it's very time intensive, it helped me a lot. It gave me a very strong basis in that whenever something bad happens with computers, I never panic. I kind of know where to look and how to deal with it. But today I have less time to use this approach, obviously. It is very time consuming. It is, however, at least my experience has been, it's given me a very strong basis. So I kind of enjoy it. And because I have less time to do this, I wanted to look into infrastructure automation for a long time, and I played around with various tools. I played around with Docker, with Vagrant. I know how to make my custom Docker image. I know how to automate virtual machines and deploy stuff on them. I know how to script things in Linux. I've been using Linux for a long time as my operating system, so I know how to use it. It's not a problem. But it still was quite a confusing field and a very complex one, coming from programming, software development, software architecture, trainings. This is kind of where I work. And there was a time when there was a lot of talk about infrastructure automation, and you had a lot of tools coming up. You had Puppet, you had Chef, you had Terraform, you had a lot of different tools. Kubernetes, Docker, and then Docker Compose. So it's been really wild for a while, and honestly, I felt like for a long period of time, these technologies were not stable. People kept complaining about Docker, that it wasn't working that well. And so I stayed away from it, because if you've seen other videos on my channel, I kind of like technologies that are solid. But I also understand that this is a revolution. It's one of the few revolutions that we had in software development, that is containers. It's a really interesting technology that has changed a lot of things around it. So this was kind of my stance to this and my background. I tried around these tools. Most of them were quite arcane. Then I gave up, then I came back, and because I didn't have a lot of time, I didn't quite spend a lot of time to do this, and rather to work on stuff that's more interesting for our trainings and for our customers. But then I saw AI assistants coming up, and once again I kind of waited for them to come to a point where we know more or less how to use them properly. And I think now we have a good idea. And infrastructure automation seems like a very good fit for a large language model. And this takes us to the second part of this video, which is, why is this a good problem? Generally speaking, problems that are good for large language models are those problems where it's difficult for you to start, but it's easy to verify. And there are a few problems where there is this difference. And one of them is infrastructure automation, because think about it. If you want to start right now with infrastructure automation, you had to learn. First of all, which are the tools that are still used? It turns out that there are fewer now, so you probably need Docker Compose, maybe Kubernetes, but unless you're doing something corporate, probably not. And maybe Terraform, although you can probably skip Terraform and just use Bash scripts, which is what I did in this case. So Docker Compose with scripting seems to be quite enough for what we need in this case. And that's good. At least there are fewer tools and more standardized and more stable. But it's still difficult to start, because if you want to go into Docker Compose, you have to understand Docker, you have to understand maybe how to build your own images, because you might need that. You need to understand how to configure all the Docker images together in a Docker Compose file, and so on. So there's quite a lot to read and to learn, and to even if you know what the tools you want to use. But if you get a file, a Docker Compose file, and you try to start it, it will immediately give you errors if it's not correct. And there are various tools to verify that it's correct, that the syntax is fine, and so on. Now, obviously, one thing you need to pay attention to is security, because it's possible when you run Docker Compose up to get containers that are not secure. So you have to pay attention to that. That's important. It's possible that you introduce vulnerabilities on your machine by doing this. So pay attention to that. One way to avoid this is to run this on a virtual machine or on a server that you can delete. Like a cloud server, you start one, you run the Docker Compose file, see if it works or not. You delete it immediately. So you can also scan for vulnerabilities. There are tools for that. So you need to pay attention to this aspect in particular. But once you go over that, then this is a very good problem. Difficult to start, easy to verify correctness, and then once you know a specific problem, it's easy to find documentation that relates to that problem, because it's been discussed and discussed and discussed. You have a lot of material on the web about infrastructure automation and about these tools. Okay. And this takes us to the approach. So what I wanted to do was to create some lab setup for our participants to courses. And I wanted this to simplify both the trainer side of things. I just need to run a command and it will span how many servers I need with all the material set up for participants to go in, solve the problems and work on specific challenges. And that's a great advantage that we introduce for our customers now. But in order to do that, I had to work with Claude and figure out how to get there. But I had a clear problem, and I'm not gonna go into more details than that, but know that I knew precisely what I wanted. And that's what I would advise you to do as well. So first of all, there are some prompts that you need to know. The general prompt that I'm using for starting a chat session with Claude is act as an infrastructure specialist. This is the problem. And I describe the problem. This is the context. I describe if there are any constraints, maybe price constraints, maybe time constraints, maybe, what do we want to use, what we don't want to use, whatever constraints you might have. And then you end with ask any questions you might have. All these are important. I didn't know that they are important, and actually I didn't believe that they are important. But based on my experience, once you tell Claude act as an infrastructure specialist, it focuses its answers on that area of its model. And my guess is that inside the model, the ways, because of the question, the ways that lead to the area of its large language model that actually fits this context. Second, description of the problem, it's obvious. The context, my guess, quite obvious. But ask any questions you might have is such a brilliant thing to do, because Claude then comes back and asks a lot of questions that are quite relevant and that help you clarify and make decisions about the requirements. And that is just great. It's been very helpful. Now, are those questions you couldn't think about? No. You could probably think about them. But if you are learning something, then you will miss certain questions if you are not an expert in that domain. And therefore, yes, he did ask sometimes too many questions, but honestly, it didn't bother me, because I would answer the ones that are important to me and then say to the others, we don't care about those, let's go. So it's really good. Another thing that I had to do after using Claude for a while was it has a preference tab where you give it a prompt as a general preference for you as a user. Think about it like the system prompting that it uses, but focused on you. And I have more things there, including that I have a strong technical background, but I also have, because he kept asking me, but I have another thing which is very important. Do not generate code until explicitly asked. I want to discuss alternative options first. Otherwise, it jumps into very long answers and generating a lot of files that then you need to look into, verify, and so on. And that's very unproductive. So, particularly when you learn, but not only, because, there's one joke I remember about code reviews. If it's 5 lines, then it's you get comments, but if it's 500 lines, you get no comment. That's precisely what's happening here. When it generates a lot of code, it's very hard, for me at least, to understand. I have my own limitations of context windows, right? And then another part of the approach was, once I got, let's say, alternatives or maybe a generated file, or then I started questioning the choices. Why do we need a specific service? Why do we need that setting? Are there alternatives to using this? Like, should we use engines, or are there other alternatives that would work better in this case? Why do we use that and not that? One example here is it better to use environment variables for passing secrets, or is it better to use configuration files that we use just during the initial setup and then delete, actually shred them? So remove them and shred them from the file system. And it gave me a nice comparison between these two. So you need to be open and keep asking questions, because remember, you want to learn stuff. Another very important thing is I would go incrementally. So I gave it the complete problem description. It then gives me alternatives, well, asks questions, clarify requirements. We then discuss alternatives. And then for the alternative that I pick, I'm saying, okay, let's just do this for one server, or let's just add one service first and see that it works. You really need to do this incrementally, and I will explain why in a moment, but it has to do with the limited context window. And also with the limited context window of people, right? As a parenthesis here, so I find it really funny when people complain that large language models are not predictable in their answers, or that they have these limitations with context windows. I mean, didn't we want a human-like intelligence? Don't humans have the same problems? I don't get it, right? I mean, there are valid concerns about it, but they are more on the side of this computer program is not behaving like all the other computer programs that I know, rather than, you know, it's a human-like intelligence, so it has the human limitations, including making up things. So, yeah, but okay. Parenthesis closed. And finally, another thing that we need to do is ask for review for different angles. So I get the file and I'm testing it, it works. Now I go into another chat window, I create another chat, and I say, act as a security expert. I have this setup, including Docker files, Nginx configuration, whatever else. What security issues do I have? And the reason for doing this in a separate chat is, once again, because you are focusing on a specific part of its model. In this case, security expertise. If you try, you could try to do this in the main prompt, but for one, context windows will end up quite quickly for a non-trivial problem. And second, it might not give you the complete and correct analysis, because it's still in the context of an infrastructure specialist, which maybe it's not the same. So these are some of the things. And you can also ask for performance improvements. In my case, it wasn't. a problem. But you could ask, okay, I have this set, act as a performance specialist. I have this setup. How can I improve its performance? Other things. Maybe in terms of metrics, if you want to gather metrics, you could still ask as a infrastructure specialist, but maybe you want to get some very specific metrics, and then you would go into maybe act as a specialist in measuring software operation. What are the metrics I should look into, and with what tools, and so on. So there are all kinds of things that you can add here. And now let's pass to the next section, which is what was good. What was good in all this experiment is that I learned a lot about infrastructure automation. Now I know what tools to use. I have examples that work. I can adapt those examples to work for other scenarios. I know where to look for help. And I have models that I can start from. I have patterns. I can find resources. It's much better. I also got a very good working solution. It's simple, it's easy to replicate, it works, it's easy to port to any cloud system that I might choose. It's quite great. And it solves a lot of the challenges that I had before. And there were quite many. If you would ask me to do this without an assistant, I would have probably given up at some point because there were so many challenges and not enough time. But I'm gonna go back to this. And actually, I want to talk about this a little bit more. I'm not sure that this approach was faster, but it really kept me going. And that's one of the big things that I guess people don't understand, or it's underrated. If you have the technical knowledge, because I have a strong basis, I know what to look for, I know what to avoid, then these assistants enable you to do things that you wouldn't do otherwise. Having this accessible support so close is really underrated. Now, if I were an infrastructure specialist, I would probably use Claude in a completely different way. Maybe support with a review, support with I have this model, let's generate it, or let's improve it, or so. And the problems are much more complex. And as I said in the beginning, and as I will say in the end, I don't believe that it will replace the specialists, but it can empower them to do so much more, as it empowered me to do so much more. And this is, to me, the biggest thing about large language models. They empower me to do things that I wouldn't do otherwise. They are enablers. And that's very hard to discuss in terms of productivity, because it just means that I had infinite productivity, because otherwise it would have been zero. We got nothing if I were just to read through resources and try things out. While with Claude, I got something that works. So the difference is infinity, right? Yeah. We cannot discuss in these terms. Now, if I were to be consistent, and if I had the time and persistent and so on, I'm not sure if it was faster to use Claude than to do it the other way. Because at some points we were kind of cycling around the same concepts, and we kept going back and forth. And there was a point where I had to stop using Claude and actually start doing my own changes. But by that time, I already knew what I was doing, which, again, learning curves, difficult to estimate, which is, by the way, one reason why software development is so difficult, if not impossible to estimate, because it's a complete learning curve. Anyway, finally, the questions Claude asked were very good. They help me clarify my own requirements. Sometimes it asks too many questions, but it's better to have too many questions that are good and say, I don't care about those 5, but I care about the other 3, and they are very important. Now, could I have figured out that or without Claude? Probably. But it's also likely that it would have taken me some time. Would a specialist have figured it out without Claude, that, all the requirements? Yes, I think definitely yes. But you could also double check. So all in all, I think it's a good thing. Now, the not so good stuff, which is the next section of this video, or the challenges that we faced. The context window for Claude is still quite small for complicated project. It's not small. I mean, it doesn't end in one day, but it does eventually start moving slowly, and eventually tells you, this is too long. I cannot deal with this anymore. Which means that I had to start some chats from the middle, which means that it's quite annoying because you have to re-explain things. Now, I'm gonna talk about how to make this work in the next section. Second point, the generated configuration and code was too complex. It keeps adding things that I don't need or I didn't ask for. But it just takes like an enthusiastic junior programmer. Okay, which is quite a contrast because it asks very good questions, questions that an expert would ask. But then when it comes to code, it just adds stuff because they are cool, I guess. Well, let's not anthropomorphize. I know why it adds stuff, because they are often in the training model. So it's a statistical based things. But it feels like you're dealing with an over-enthusiastic junior programmer. And also it made some decisions that were overcomplicating things and so on. So you need to challenge it. You need to keep challenging it, or take the generated file and just start deleting stuff until you get to what you need, and then start another chat with Claude from that point on, and with that configuration, if you need to. Now, hilariously, I had this episode yesterday, which was quite funny, where it added a file server, which I didn't ask for, to my setup. And I told it, remove this file server, and it removed it. Oh, but it actually added some other things. It added some log rotation for Docker, which I didn't actually need. And another things which is I failed to remember right now. But what happened is I asked it, please delete this. Yes, I deleted it. Then I look in the file, is still there. Please delete this. You haven't deleted it. Oh, I don't see it in the file. Then I point to the lines and I say, delete these lines. I don't see these lines in the 5.   file. And then after a bit of back and forth, it finally it eventually got to deleting it, but it had to rewrite the whole section just to delete those lines, because otherwise it just couldn't see that they were there, or it would try to delete but not actually delete them. It was funny. um, I don't know exactly what happens in this situation. I guess it's something akin to a blind spot, but who knows. If you have an answer on why this happens, I'd be curious to learn why. But yeah. And final point is still too eager to jump to code generation. Despite me telling it, discuss alternatives first, the way it works is once I let it generate code, it just keeps on generating code and generating code. And this occasionally drives me nuts because I don't want it to keep generating code. Sometimes I just have questions. So I have to keep reminding it, without generating code, let's talk about this, and let's talk about this, and let's talk about this. And it's a pain to do this. I don't know why it's so overeager to generate code. I don't want it. I just want it when I tell it to. Maybe I will get a better prompt to fix this, but I still haven't found one. So be aware, it keeps doing that. Once again, it behaves like an over-enthusiastic junior developer in this case. Okay, and the final section, conclusions and advice. To me, my conclusion, this is a really good method to learn if you prefer learn by doing. You can pick a problem, use well-crafted prompts and the things that I told you about, be aware of the limitations, and you can learn a lot by doing this. And also be ready to stop when you see that it doesn't help you anymore. It's a good idea to start from requirements and then identify alternatives and then create an incremental plan. So we'll first do something that works for one server with one service, then add the second service, then deploy it to the server, or just add one service, deploy it to the server, and so on. So pick some steps that are incremental. And Claude can help you to create this plan, but usually you need to adjust it based on my experience. And of course, you need to double check and adjust everything. That's the general thing with large language models. They do hallucinate, they do create commands that don't exist or options that don't exist. So you have to double check everything. Be prepared to work on each increment in a separate session. So once you figured out, if I were to do this all over again, I would start with the general prompt and then figure out the increments and then start a new chat for each increment. Re-explain the context and the decisions that we made. By the way, you can ask Claude to generate a document, a summary with the decisions that you made. So you have that, you can take that, you can take the alternative that you decided upon and say, okay, and this is the first increment, let's do this. And then another chat where you do the same things, but now this is the second increment, this is what we have as a Docker compose and whatever other files. This is the second increment, let's do this. And so on. And the reason to do that is because you avoid the limitations of the context window. Now, you can probably solve multiple increments in one session if you have more. But the worst thing that could happen is that you are in the middle of solving increment 5 and it just tells you that you cannot do anymore. And then you have to create a new chat and restart, and it feels like rework. It doesn't feel great. It feels like you're not progressing. So it's best, at least psychologically speaking, it's best to avoid this situation if you believe you can face it and get over it. Yeah, sure, why not? But also be aware that the longer you go in a context window, the more tokens are used, so your usage goes up. If I remember correctly, I think that's correct. Please double check me if I'm not, or leave a comment saying I am right. I like those comments as well. And now the last thing is use separate chats for separate concerns. So you'll use one, let's say one for each increment, but then if you want to do performance improvements, use another chat. If you want to do security analysis, use another chat, and so on. Because act as a role is really a great way to focus the conversation. It works really well. Now, there are more techniques that you could use here. You could give the same prompt to multiple large language models. So same prompt to Claude, same prompt to ChatGPT, compare the results. To me, it feels like a lot of work to do that. But you can double check. So you can maybe do one increment in Claude, one increment in ChatGPT. I'm just gonna stick with one for now because it's already very complicated to deal with all this stuff. So, and I prefer tools that I know and that are stable and I know how to work with them. So, in the end, what do I take out of this experience? It's been a very useful experience. I've learned a lot. I created what I needed to do. I solved a problem. It enabled me to solve a problem that I wanted to solve for a very long time. And it's opened a really nice area of development for Mozaic Works and providing these really great experiences to our participants' trainings. And I'm sure we'll work on this for a lot more. And Claude has enabled me to do that. Now, is this a perfect solution? No. Will this replace infrastructure specialists? No, I don't think so. Does it empower other people to do infrastructure? Yes, if you have the patience, the time, the skill, the background. Could a person who has no idea about technical domain use Claude to do infrastructure automation? I sincerely really doubt it because there are so many things you need to learn and that I've learned in a lot of time of playing and toying around with systems. So is Claude AGI yet? No, I don't think we'll see that soon. So this is my general observation. It's a really great enabler. It's a multiplier for people who already know what they are doing, but it's not something that can help people who have no technical background in doing complex stuff like this. I don't believe it. So no vibe coding. This is just coding or augmented intelligence. It's my intelligence augmented with, and my background augmented with an AI assistant. And this is where I think we need to focus our efforts related to large language models. Now, if during this whole video you didn't hear me talk about any ethical concerns, know that we do have a video on ethical concerns about large language models, and those are quite serious, but I don't want to discuss them in every video. And also, my feeling is that these systems will take over and we'll use them more and more, whether we like them or not, whether we believe they are ethical or not. I think they will revolutionize the way we do a lot of things. So this is where we are. And with this being said, leave us some comments, share, like, subscribe, tell other people about this channel and about this video. Thank you kindly for the view, and until next time, remember to think, design, and work smart. See you next Saturday.